was the Mishnah.
Okay, so let's do now in the Beitzah on 14a. We did this piece last time, but we'll do it again. And we're talking all about grinding for Yontif. The different, talked about spices and about salt, about different things. So here we have a Beitzah Tona Rabbona. It's towards the bottom of the page on 14a. Ein oisin tisni. Tisni is a kind of a grinded up wheat. I guess they didn't just break up the wheat, but it broke up into four pieces. I guess that was sort of an extra effort. It took a while. So basically, the Brisa says you cannot make this tisni beyontiv. You can't make it on yontiv, this tisni here. And the reason is, says Rashi, Shetoirach Godolhu, because this is a big trouble. To make tisni is a lot. It's not just crushing, but to make the tisni is a big struggle. Why? Big trouble. Shekoitesh hachitzim, he crushes the wheat ad shenechlokim echod larbo. One turns into four. Kidamrin b'moed cotton, like we say moed cotton. That seems to be more than the Chachamim wanted you to do work on Yontif. So this Tisni you can't do on Yontif. And then the Mishnah says, the Brisa says another halacha. Ve'ein koitshin b'machteshes. You cannot crush in a crusher. The usual understanding of a crusher is a large crusher, as we'll see in the Gemara. So you can't use a crusher. Now, the Gemara finds these two statements being contradictory. Because when you say you can't make tisni, that means you can't make one wheat, break it into four pieces, but that is basically saying, but you're just breaking it up into two pieces, or you're not breaking it up like the tisni, that should be okay. Because we're only saying you can't do tisni. So that would imply that you could use a crusher on Yom Tov, as long as you're not making tisni, right? But then this statement that follows immediately says, Ve'en koitshim b'machteshes. Over here it seems to say that you don't use a grinder, a crusher altogether, right? Not only not tisni. So the Gemara immediately after this sentence of the Brisa asks Tarti, these two statements don't fit together. Rashi explains, Tarti, Shnei dvorim yeshkan, there's two things here. Loized doimelazed, these two are not fit with each other. You can't compare them to each other. They don't fit. Why? On one hand, Kotoni, you says, Ein oisin tisni, that you don't make tisni. Okay. So what is the implication? What does it imply? O chelka v'daisa. Chelka probably means split in two. Daisa is like another kind of a kasha or some sort of a grind it up that you shop your dummy. That would be okay. Because you're saying don't make tisna because tisna is a big trouble. So it implies that something which is not so troublesome, like the chelka v'daisa, it's okay. The ein tircha meruba. So how does it follow v'hodar toni ein koichin klal? And then you say, oh, you can't use a crusher altogether. if you can't use a crusher, so then it's not only tisneh that you can't make. You can't make anything else you can't make. So how do we
I have a
say these two
question.
statements one after the other? That's the Gemara's question.
Question,
Yes.
is a mortar and pestle a crusher?
Is a what?
Mortar and pestle a crusher?
I'm not sure what this mortar presser is.
It's like pharmacists used to use to grind
Oh yeah,
uh, into a
I think so.
powder.
I think it would be considered a crusher, but I would suggest that we wait. The Gemara is going to make some differences between a large crusher and a smaller crusher. I'm going to assume what the pharmacists use this is a smaller crusher because they do medicine in there, correct?
I have a small mortar and pestle that I use to grind fennel seeds and other spices.
Right. So we had that the discussion before, and the Gemara basically what we learned is that those spices that would sort of evaporate if you did it before Yom Tov, um, then you should be able to do it on Yom Tov because you want fresh spices. But salts,
So
on
is,
the other hand, there was difference of opinion over there. I'm not ruling the halacha now. I'm just telling you what we learned before.
sure. So the
So
seed is considered a
I'm
spice, I
not
guess.
sure if the seed. So let me ask you, since you do it, does it lose some of its potency if it's done from the day before, or it makes no difference? In other words, is
I,
the food better to use on Yom Tov when you do it on Yom Tov itself? Does it make a difference to the final product?
minimal at best.
Okay, so then it may not be allowed because of that. The other thing is
Okay.
also, especially if the minimal, as you're saying, and if you know that you're going to use it, right? If you know that you're going to use it, then you should prepare it from before Yom Tov. The Gemara used the reasoning before that we had previously is that um, that salt you have to prepare before because everybody uses salt for their food. We all need salt, so you can't say, "Oh, I didn't think that I was going to use this particular dish that I would need salt," because you know you're going to need salt, so do it before. But as far as crushing some of the other uh, spices, etc., there, one can technically say, well, I didn't have in mind yesterday that I was going to eat a dish that I would need that kind of a spice, but now that I'm eating it, so then the chum will allow. Again, I'm not ruling the halacha over here. I have to look this
Sure,
up.
sure.
Because I'm just giving an academic from what we learned in the Gemara. Yeah.
What I understand what you said about the spices from previously. It was when you bring in the size of the crusher, does
Okay,
that
so for that,
change?
well, let's wait for a minute. We'll see what the
Fine.
Gemara says about the size of the crusher. The Gemara wants to make a distinction in 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 your case. One of the reasons why the size makes a difference is because first of all, the quantity, how much you do, and also is it the normal way? From what I understand, this is the normal use of it, so that would really not qualify as a shinui. One of the one of the allowances is based on the fact that you don't use it in the usual way, and that would give it an extra allowance because uh, doing something not in a weekday manner, the Chachamim would allow. They don't want you to do it in the usual way. Well, let's wait for a minute to see about the larger and smaller crushers. Okay.
Fine. That's fine. Thank you.
What you want to? You can still say. You want to say something, please. Okay.
I'm all set. All set.
Oh, said good. Okay. So the Gemara says So the Gemara understands the second sentence as saying, yeah, what? Rinse it out. No, no, that's okay. No, Lisa's coming to Sharon for a week, something. Okay, I gave the message. Lisa Strun.
Oh, yeah, she wants to connect.
She wants to connect. She knows about it.
Okay.
Okay. So,
We're Potter.
okay. I just didn't want to forget. So she walked in, so I told her. So it seemed from this second statement that you can't use a crusher altogether. That's what it seemed. And the Gemara is asking, if you say you can't make tisni, but to crush something which is not such a trouble like the tisni should be okay. And the Gemara says, Hochikamar, this is what he's really saying. These are not two separate halachas. He says, Matam ein oisin tisni. What's the reason we can't do tisni? Not like we said before. What was the reason before that we said that you can't do tisni? Because it's a lot of trouble. But here the Gemara gives a different reason. What's the reason that we can't do tisni? Is because you're not allowed to use a crusher again at all on Yontif. So it's not the Gemara thinks that you can't do tisni, but you can do other things. And the Gemara says, no, that's not what the Beitzah means. What the Beitzah means to say is you can't use tisni because you can't use a crusher. And therefore you can't crush anything. You can't use tisni, you can't crush anything. So in that case, why does he tell you can't do tisni? Just tell you don't crush, and that's it. Well, you're saying you can't do tisni not because there's anything wrong with tisni specifically. That is, it's not specially tisni you can't do. You just can't crush. So why don't you just say don't crush? You can't blame him. So let him say ein kochim b'machteshes, that you don't crush with a crusher, just straight out. Don't talk about tisni. Rashi. And now Yadaino, and I would know already the Suloim is Abid Tisna, that Tisna cannot be made without the crusher. You're not going to make Tisna. So what do I have to tell you? You can't make Tisna, you can't use a crusher. Inevitably, you won't be able to use it. And Rashi gives you now another pointer to understand the following piece of Gemara. The stam machteshes hainu gedoyla. Ordinary, when we just say a machteshes, a crusher, it's a large one. It's not a small one. And the Gemara goes now on to explain why it doesn't say don't use a crusher. So the Gemara is saying, technically, itoni ein koichin b'machteshes. If it just said we can't crush in a crusher, havamino, then I would think, hani mili b'machteshes gedoyla. If it just said don't use a crusher, that it's probably talking about a large crusher. Avo b'machteshes kitano, but to use a small crusher, emo shapir domi, then I would say, yeah, that's okay. And we wouldn't, if we just say don't use a machteshes, we would say, you know what, we can't use a large one because a machteshes plane means a large one, but a smaller one you can use. And you want to make tisnin a smaller one, fine, there's nothing special. So therefore, if it just says don't use a grinder, machteshes, then I would not know that you can't make tisni. I would think you could make tisni, because I would say when the Mishnah says you can't do a grinder, it means a big one, but a small one you can do tisni. So kamash.
Why would you think that? I mean, it
Why?
says if the
Because
Gemara just
if the
said
Mishnah
don't use,
just, yeah, go ahead.
the Gemara just said don't use a grinder, then you would assume any size.
No, so that's why Rashi says to you before, Stam machteshes, hainu gedolah. If it says a grinder, it means a large one. That's what's called a machteshes. Maybe the small ones are not really always called machteshes, but Rashi says that's the way it would be the assumption that the machteshes means a large one. And we wouldn't make a difference between tisni and non-tisni. We would say you can't use a small grinder for a big grinder you can't use for anything. But a small grinder you can use for everything because it only prohibits you a grinder, which stam means a large one. So therefore, kamash malon. That's why the Beitzah says no. The Beitzah says no. Tisni, you cannot even do in a large one. Kamash malon. And grinding, you can do in a small one. So he says, well, no. No. Kamash malon. Let's read Rashi. So Rashi says Kamash malon. That's why he tells us ein oisim tisne klal. You don't make tisne at all. Why? Lefi she'ein koichin shum ketisha b'machteshes. It says because here actually you're saying you can't do any crushing in the machteshes. So that's why we're saying tisni is not at all. The hach machteshes. So we just said machteshes means a large one, right? If it says stam. But we're saying that you can't do tisni at all, not even in a small one, right? So when it says here, don't do tisni at all because you can't do no ketisha b'machteshes, meaning you can't crush at all. So no crushing even in a small one. And so Rashi says, "V'hach machteshes al korchoch lo yishno gedoylo v'lo yishno ktana." This, when it says now, the way we're learning now, you can't do tisni because you can't do a crushing, means no difference between if it's a big machtesh or a small one. Midetoni reisha ain't oisim tisni klal. Because in the first sentence it says you don't make tisni at all. And it says because you can't crush. But here, if it would only be, we said if it would only be in a big one, then it would have just said in koshim machteshes. But here, so why do we have to say noisin tisni? Noisin tisni tells you because you can't do it at all. So therefore, we have to say because you don't grind in a machteshes whether they're big or small. Anyways, according to the Gemara's answer now, you cannot use a small grinder, you cannot use a big grinder, and you cannot use a machteshes at all for anything. So why does it only say, because he wants to make sure that you can't do tisna at all. I'm still trying to understand exactly. So why does it say? So you're saying you can't say that you can't do machteshes because then you would think it means a gedolah. So I'm telling you now, you can't do tisni. So if you can only not do it in a gedolah, so then it should say if it's only the problem is doing it in a gedolah, then it should just say ein ein kochim, then it would mean a gedola. But because it says you don't do tisni, because ein kochim, that means it doesn't make a difference if it's a gedola katana. But are we saying over here, tisni you can't make whether it's a gedola or a katana, but other things that you could make? If that's the case, so what? So what's the problem? Tisni you can't make at all, and the other halacha is that you can't use a grinder. I guess you can't just say "en koichim" only means a small one. You can say you can't use a small one, you can't use a large one. It's all included, but it can't just mean a small one. So the bottom line is we can't use a grinder at all. Small or big, we can't use it on Shabbos. And that's why you can't make tisnei. Now, you can not only not make tisnei, but you can't make anything else either. But the only way, but the reason we're saying to you, tisnei, again, so I'm not really getting it so well. Why, if it is, all grinders are prohibited, according to this idea, all grinders are prohibited. So we can't say that you can't use a grinder because that would mean a big one. So I'm telling you, you can't make tisnei, so why doesn't it just say you can't do, like Rashi gave the other example? Why doesn't it say we can't make chalaka or daisa, right? Can't make chalaka or daisa because you can't do any grinding on Shabbos.
On Yom Tov.
On Yom Tov. You can't do any grinding at all. In other words, is tisnei anything different than anything else? So we took it for sure because it says you can't do tisnei. And the Gemara answers, and what was the Gemara's answer in the beginning? The Gemara says that it's not a separate halacha because you can't make tisnei because you can't do b'machteshes. What would that mean? So now that we learned it's a reasoning, it's not a separate halacha. So why can't we only not make tisnei because we can't do machteshes? Why doesn't it say that we can't do halakha v'daisa because you don't do kochim v'machteshes? So forget it. The Gemara asked the question, why doesn't it just say en kochim v'machteshes? The Gemara says, okay, en kochim v'machteshes, you would think it means a gedola, but a ktana was okay. So that's why I'm telling you now, I'm missing something over here. I confess. But let's go weiter.
Well, there's probably something about tisnei that was obvious to them, but not obvious to us because it's not something we do ever. But it probably seemed pretty obvious to someone who made it like that. There's something else about it.
All right, let's go in a minute and see Levaita. Maybe it'll be more clear. But the Gemara asks a question now from a Beitzah. The Gemara concluded that we can't use no at all. What I don't understand, if you can't do anything at all, right? Why doesn't it just say? Why does it say tisnei? Why does it just say? Don't do a kochim, not a gedola, not a ketana or something. Why say don't make tisnei? I mean, tisnei seems to stand out. It's not clear. So I'm missing something over here. But okay. So, but he has another question. Fredi Gemara, but Tanya, but we learn another Beitzah. In this Beitzah, it says very clearly, "Ein kochim b'machteshes gedola, avol kochim b'machteshes ketana." well, you can't crush in a large one, but you can crush in a small one. So it says clearly, how did you say now that you can't do it at all? It said you could. What's the reason why you can do it in a Ketano? So he says, and it's interesting, he says, because this is considered Avokochim B'Ketano, the Havi Kilachar Yad, because that's doing it kind of backwards. That's like doing it backwards. The Eina Lelatablin, where Rashi explains here, the normal use of a smaller one is made for spices. I guess he's using it to crush the grain, right? You don't use a small crusher, which is meant for spices. And therefore, it's considered like doing it backwards, kilachar yad, in a backwards way. And therefore, that's a shinui. And with a shinui, that's allowed. So here you just concluded in the previous Beitzah that whether a big one or a small one, you're not allowed to do it. Oh, I think I understand what I was struggling before. It didn't say, it didn't mention Tisnei as to say that's something else. He's just trying to tell you, you're not going to be able to make this Tisnei on Yom Tov. Because even if you're going to want to use a smaller one, it's not going to help you. You can't do it at all. So it's not trying to say you can't do anything else either. But, maybe people like Tisnei, they liked it, or it was a common thing. So he's telling you, you can't make Tisnei. So he said, wait a minute, I want to use a small one. It's a change. No, you can't use a small one either because you can't use anything. So you're not going to have Tisnei. Well, you're asking me, you can't do anything else either. But I guess that's it. Okay, so the Gemara asked the question on the conclusion in the previous Beitzah, the way we learned that you can't crush even in a small one. But in this Beitzah, it says in a small one you could. That would be considered a change and not the normal way. And that should be allowed. Amar Abaye says he changes. He says, Kitanya nami masniso machteshes gedoy latanya. When the previous Beitzah talked about, he's going to reconcile this with this Beitzah. And when it said before, because you don't do it with a big one. And taka with a small one, you're allowed to do it. Let's see what Rashi says. Kitanya nami masnis in the liil. What did we learn? Machteshes gedoy latanya. Over there, he's talking about a large one. Don't say that he's giving the reason. There's two. Ein oisnim tisni klal afilu biktano. Oh, you don't make tisni at all, even in a small one. It's too much trouble, so you don't make tisni. But ve'ein koichin shar kedisha b'machteshes kugon daisa, like the kasha, the daisa, like Rashi said before. In v'stam machteshes b'gedol komaydi. So according to this, it's pretty straightforward. According to this, according to this explanation now in the Gemara, according to Abaye's explanation, there's two separate halachas. One halacha is by tisni. Tisni, big one, small one, you can't do. Another halacha is for other items, a small one is okay. But a big one you can't do. So when it says ein koichin and b'machteshes, is talking about a big one. So Abaye is actually following the simple meaning of the pasuk of the. Okay, let's turn the page over here. But the Rava disagrees. As usual, the Rava disagrees. And Rava says, L'olam atam ka'omar. He's saying, what's the reason? Meaning, you can't make tisni at all because you can't use any crusher. Ubiktana nami koi, and we're actually dealing even a small one. You can't do it. Omar ein koichin klal, and he says you don't crush at all. We're still going back to the previous answer. Now the Gemara said Raminon Allah aval koichin, but we had a question from another brayse. It says you could use a small one. How could you say you can't make tisni at all? Because you're not even going to allow to use a small one. But we learned in another brayse that you can crush with a small one. And the Gemara makes another distinction. The Gemara says, like Kashir, this isn't the difficulty. Why? Because Holon, this is to us, to the people of Babel, Bahalahu, and that's to the people of Eretz Yisrael. Meaning, in Babel, you can't use even a small crusher. In Eretz Yisrael, I'm sorry. We can use the second brayse that it says that you could use, is talking about the people in Babel. You're allowed to use a small crusher. But in Eretz Yisrael, Lahu, you can't use a crusher at all. That's the first brayse that we learned. And there's a difference is why? Because the people in Babel didn't have any servants. They did things themselves. So if you allow them to crush it in a small one, that's okay because it's a change. That's okay. That doesn't. That's good. But in Eretz Yisrael, it's not good because they have workers. They have servants that serve them, and those servants don't care about the mitzvahs. If you're going to allow to crush, they'll be crushing in the big one, and they'll say we use the small one. Let's look at the Rashi. Lo kashir, these two brises are not contradicted. Hold on. This is to us, the brise that says that we are allowed to, is to us, to the people of Bavel. The leis lon avdi de mezalzali. We don't have servants that cheapen, don't keep respect for the holiday. And therefore, by us, we are allowed to use a small crusher because it's a change. But the other brisa that says that you can't use it either way is talking about Eretz Yisrael. The Islu Avdi de Mezalzli. They have workers, servants that are cheap, and they will make it in a big one. We did it. They'll say we did it in a small one. We don't trust them, so therefore we don't allow you to do this at all. So basically, there's two ways to learn the first brisa, and okay. So according to Rava, you can't do it at all. But we're talking about where? About Eretz Yisrael. The brisa means that you can't do it at all. When it says don't make tisni at all because you can't do it, not in a big one, not in a small one. Why? Because in Eretz Yisrael you can't do it, not in a big one, not in a small one. Because they have servants over there, and if you let them do it in a small one, they'll do it in a big one. They'll say we did it in a small one, so we can't do it. But in the second brisa, that's talking about in Bavel, because the small one is a change, there's not a problem. Abaye learned differently. Abaye learned that brisa never Aser the small one. It only the Tisni is allowed to do it. So according to him, you can do it in a small one. Okay. Says the Gemara now, Rapapi Iklo Libei Mar Shmuel. Rapapi happened to the home of Mar Shmuel. Isilei Daisa. So they brought him Daisa. They brought him porridge. It looked like it was grinded up. It was grinded up wheat. So he didn't eat. Why? Because he thought they grinded it on Yontif. So he didn't eat. Because he doesn't think that you can grind on Yontif. But Shmuel is the one, no. In a small one, maybe they did it in a small machteshes, and I guess that's allowed, at least according to by us, you're allowed to do it in a small machteshes. But according to both to Rava and Abaye, a small machteshes you're allowed to do. No, but if we learn in the previous case, no, it's not there. I'm just trying to think. Didn't we learn? What did we learn? That according to Abaye says that it's two separate things, but according to Abaye and the Rava, and a smaller one you can use, yes. So according to both Abaye and the Rava, by a small one you can use. So the Gemara, so maybe they used it a small one. So why didn't he eat it? And the Gemara, the Chazia, the Havedayik Tvei, he saw it was very thin, so he knew it was done with a big one, not with a small one, because it wouldn't be so piecey. So then the Gemara says, well, maybe it was done before Yom Tov. Dilma asked him, why didn't he eat it? Maybe they did it from the day before, so it's okay. They did it before Yom Tov. And the Gemara said, the Chazia Davi Kolif Tzare. He saw that it was the color. He saw the color, Davi Kolif Tzare, that it looked peeled and white, so it looked very fresh, I guess. So he assumed that it was done then. Kolif Tzare.
So you think what he would have said is, do you hold that we could do this on Yontif instead of just not eating?
Could have said something.
Yeah, he could have said, oh, you learned the halacha differently to teach me.
Yeah, well, I don't know. He didn't do that. V'iboy Seimo. The Gemara gives another answer. Shani Beimar Shmuel. The house of Bar Shmuel is different. The Iko Pritzusa over there he had, yes, he was in Bavel, but he had the servants over there, and they were like out of control. They weren't careful with the Torah. So over there, you couldn't let them even do with the small one, as like we learned before. Like Rava made the difference before between Eretz Yisrael and Bavel. Well, this was in Bavel, but it was Shmuel had these kind of servants that they were do it. So you weren't allowed to let them at all, and that's why he didn't want to eat. Okay, let's go to the next Mishnah. So the Mishnah, Haboirer kitniyos b'yomtiv. One who sorts out legumes on yontivs. So how does he do that? Beishamai say, boirer oichel ve'oichel. Normally we have a din on Shabbos that you have to take the food from the leftovers, not the leftovers. In other words, you take out the good from the bad, not the bad from the good. So Beishamai is saying the same thing on Yontiv. First of all, he's saying boirer oichel. And another stipulation is va'oichel, that you have to eat it right away. So as you're picking, you can't just pick out even the oichel and then leave it for later on. But as you're eating, you can take the oichel and put it in your mouth and eat it. So you need two things: boirer oichel. Oichel, you choose the oichel, not the pseudus. You don't remove the bad, but you take the food, and then you eat it right away. And Basil say that boirer kidarke. Boirer kidarke means that on Yom Tov, you can do it in the normal way, which means you can either remove the pseudus, the bad from the bad from the good, and you can do it bechekoi if you do it in your lap. Bekonen ubetamchui. Those are different tools that konen they have it's not the professional, not the regular way. You can use a konen atamcha, avaloi betablo, but you can't put it on a big place. Put it on your lap a little bit, and use these not unusual way, but not nofa, a sift, a kvora is another kind of sift. That's the regular way. Don't use that. But you could use the pseudus, remove it, and as long as it's on your lap and you use a konen and a tamchui, which is not the professional ways of doing it, it's a change, can do it. But you can't do it on a tabla, on a plat, a lot, and not enough in a kvara. Those are sifts. Rabbi Gamliel says, he goes even further. He says you're allowed to af madiach v'shoila. You can even rinse it and remove, which basically means that you fill up a bucket with legumes, you put in water, and the shell flows to the top, and you can remove the shells. You can even do that. Af madiach b'shoila. Let's see in the Gemara. So the Gemara Tanya. So we learned in a Beitzah. Omar Rabbi Gamliel, says Rabbi Gamliel, Bamedvar Mamurim. When did Beis Hillel allow to take the psoilus, the bad from the good? Bamedvar Mamurim, the Shoru Beis Hillel, little psoilus mamish lahaslich, to take the bad, actual bad, and to throw it away. Kishahichel meruba al psoilus. That's when the food is the majority over the leftovers. Avo psoilus meruba al ha'ichel. But when the psoilus is more than the food, then he won't let you take the psoilus. Divrei hakel neitel es ha'ichel u'maniach psoilus. So all the people agree, which means also Hillel agrees that you have to take the food. You can't take. If there's more psoilus than oichel, that means, usually that would mean that it's easier to pick. You have to pick a whole lot of psoilus to get to the oichel. So it says, no. In the case, if you have more psoilus than oichel, go for the oichel and take it out of the psoilus, because in order to get to the oichel, you'll have to remove a lot of psoilus. We don't want you to do that. If there is more oichel, so then we're saying you can get rid of the psoilus. You're not gonna. But if there's more psoilus, then don't remove all the psoilus and go to the oichel. That's what Rabbi Chaim Wolosow says. But the Gemara says, psoilus meruba oichel, if you have the situation that you have more leftover, more psoilus than you have the food, Mikam the shori. Is there anybody that permits that? You're not allowed to even move. That's not called full. It's not called food. If you have so much, you have a majority of junk in there. You have majority of peel. It's not a food. You're not allowed to even move it on Yom Tov. Rashi, Mikam the shori. You're not allowed to forget about taking the good from the bad. You can't move that because it's so much. If the majority is no good, then it's no good. The minority is bottle next to the majority. So it's considered like it's all psoilus. It's not fit for eating, so you're not allowed to even move it on Yom Tov if you have more psoilus. I think one answers it's not more physically, more psoilus than oichel, but there's more trouble. He says, there is an increased trouble, which means there is more oichel than psoilus, but we're saying there's more psoilus, it's an increased trouble to get the psoilus, which is less. Because sometimes it's less, the psoilus, but it's harder to get at. Because it's in between. Let's see Rashi. The nofesh b'tircha. Sheyeshnoi dak. Yeshnoi dak means that it is very thin. So to go get it is a tircha. Although there's more oichel, so we're saying more. It doesn't mean there's a more of the psoilus. It's a bigger tircha. When are you allowed to take the psoilus? Bisman shetoirecha oichel meruba al shel psoilus. If the trouble for taking the food is more than the psoilus, so therefore, who do kamri besilam metal psoilus? So then he says you can take the psoilus because there is less trouble. So if it's harder to get to the oichel, take the psoilus. That's when Beitzah allows it. The me'uta betircha odif, because it's advantageous to make a lesser tircha. Avol im toirach hapsoilus merubal shel ha'oichel. But if the trouble of the psoilus is more, we're both cases, which means it's harder to get to the psoilus. The rehakel that you have to take the oichel. So the only time we can take the psoilus, if it's easier to take the psoilus, then we can take the psoilus from the oichel. That's when Beis Hillel disagrees. But if it's easier to take the oichel, Beis Hillel will not allow you to take the psoilus. He says, no, v'zutar b'shiura, but it's smaller in the shear. That's why you're allowed to carry it, because otherwise, he said, you're not allowed to carry it because it's not considered to be oichel. It has more psoilus. It's not oichel. Rabbi Gamliel Aimer, let's see if we can finish the next Mishnah. Rabbi Gamliel Aimer, Af Madiach v'Shoila. He says you can also fill it up with water and then scoop up the leftover. Tanya, we learn the Beitzah. Omar Rabbi Lozor Rabbi Tzodek says Rabbi Tzodek, Kachoy min hogum shebeis Rabbi Gamliel. This was the tradition in the home of Rabbi Gamliel. Shoemevin b'li molei adashim. They'd bring a bucket full of lentils, umatzifin olav mailim, and they're sprinkling it down with water. until the water covers the food. And Ibcha Oichel I understand there's something wrong with the Rashi here because this belongs. Let's take a look on the Gemara for a second. In the Rashi, this Rashi belongs to the Otanya Ibcha Oichel Amayim Pselis Lamata. This belongs to the other Rashi. Yeah, Ibcha. I told them it's a new Rashi, it's a different Rashi. Yeah. See, this belongs. This is over here, it's wrong. It goes like this. Okay, so what happens is, according to this, and what happened? The nimsa oichel lemato pselis lamailo. So it comes out, the food floats down to the bottom, and the leftovers float to the top. But we learned the other way around. Ibcha, that oichel lamailo pselis lamato, that the food is on the top, and the junk is on the bottom. The Gemara says like kashi, it's not a contradiction. Why? Hoba afra, if we're talking about the dirt is sand, the sand floats down. Lamato min oichel. Hobigili, this is talking about with the peels, and the peels are lighter. They float to the top, and the food's from the bottom. Okay, let's leave it over here. And also, next week is Lag Bomer. So we're not going to have any class in Lag Bomer. So we'll meet the Mitzvah Shem, the